Hey everyone, I'm Robin, and it might be obvious from looking at my channel that I support Andrew Yang. Now, I've been in the Yang Gang before it even had the name of Yang Gang. In fact, my first contribution to Andrew's campaign was back in June of 2018, so I've been doing this for over a year. But even before that, even before Andrew filed with the FEC to run for president, I was a big supporter of universal basic income, what Andrew calls the freedom dividend. Now, there's a reason for this, and it's not just because basic income makes sense from a logical point of view, which I am a logical, scientific type of girl. I believe it would immeasurably improve people's lives, and I believe this because I look back at my life and I see all these times when it would have helped me and people I know. And so what I want to do today is tell you 6 instances when UBI would have really helped out. So number 1 here, I'm going to be very generic. I'm not going to go into great details because this is not a story that I have been okayed to tell about a specific person. But I teach at a state college, and I have a number of students every year, as you might imagine, and many of these students are working and going to school at the same time. So for many of these people, they're going to school full-time and working part-time, but every year, inevitably, I have maybe 10 or 20% of my class that is working full-time and going to school full-time. And I can usually tell which people these are because invariably they don't have enough time to study, and so they end up struggling. Not because they aren't smart enough to do the work, but because they can't put in the time they need to put in order to succeed. Now, if that weren't bad enough, every year I always have at least 1 or 2 students who are working full-time or close to full-time, are going to school full-time, and still don't make enough money to cover the rent, the tuition, and everything else that they need. And so what do they skimp on? They skimp on food. And so they sit there, and I'm trying to talk them through, here's how you work this problem, and they can't concentrate because they're hungry. And it's not just once or twice. It is a constant, ongoing problem. It's really heartbreaking. And if that's not bad enough, I've had students who are homeless. It is pretty much impossible to be in the situation that I am in, to work with the population that I work with, and not wish that all of your students could have the freedom dividend. What would an extra $1,000 a month do to those people? How would it help them prosper? I see that very clearly. But let's get a little more personal. Let's go back a couple of decades. I was a stay-at-home, homeschooling mom of 4 boys. And at the time, my husband was employed. He had a really good job, and he made a decent amount of money. Now, we weren't super rich, but we had enough to meet our needs and then some. But still, we had to make choices of what we're going to do with that extra money that was above what we needed to meet our basic needs. Should we save for emergencies? Should we save for retirement? Should we buy things for our kids that we wanted to buy for them? Should we buy things for ourselves? It was almost never the last thing. If I think about if I'd been given $1,000 a month back then, what would I have done with it? I'll tell you the first thing I would have done. I would have bought things for my kids that would have been good for them as homeschooled students. So, for example, back then my homeschool budget was $100 a year. Yes, you heard that right. That is per year, not per month. It was $100 a year, which I could only pull off because I used the library a lot. And I just thought of all the things that, I really wanted to do for them, for depending on who they were, art lessons, sports, piano lessons would have been big for my son who ended up being a musician. just all those things that I wish I could have done for them. $100 a month or $200 a month would have been so nice to spend on my kids. And that's not all. You know, we were saving for retirement every single year. We maxed out the 401k contribution for my husband. We maxed out the Roth IRA contribution for my husband. And you'll notice that I didn't max out my Roth IRA, but I certainly would have if I'd had an extra $1,000 a month to spend. So what ended up happening is when we ended up getting divorced, his retirement funds were something like, I can't remember exactly, but it was somewhere like 5 to 7 times what I had put away. And I think this is not uncommon when you have a one-earner family, is everything gets focused on that one person who's actually bringing home the bacon, and not much is thought about the person who stays home, right? We at least were smart enough to get me life insurance in case I died, but that's often not the case either. And so, people make that a low priority, but, if we knew if I died, someone would have to take care of the baby, right? And that someone would have to be paid. So we were smart. We got life insurance, but we didn't put money into my retirement. That was not a high priority. So story 3, which I kind of hinted at the last one, after we went through some really rough times, my husband started getting abusive. And as is so common in an abusive relationship, part of that was financial abuse. In other words, I was completely cut off from money. I could only spend money that he allowed me to spend. And certainly there was no money for me if I wanted to leave, right? People were like, well, you could just take a little money every time you go shopping, take out $20. Nope, I couldn't do that. He watched every single expenditure I made. So how in the world would I leave, right? And this is something that I thought about on occasion when things were getting really bad. And the answer is I didn't. I didn't think I could. And so I ended up staying probably a good 5 years after I really should have left. And now I'm paying for it. I pay for it with my health. I pay for it especially with my mental health. My kids pay for it with their mental health, at least some of them do. Some of them were hit harder than others. It was not a healthy situation to be in. And when Andrew talks about how UBI could benefit people who are in abusive relationships, like I feel that. I know that feeling. He's absolutely right. $1,000 a month, it wouldn't have been perfect, but it would have enabled me to get away. Okay, story number 4. So I've been home without a career for well over a decade. I think it was like 15 years. How do you get back into the workforce? I decided to go to grad school. I decided to get my PhD. Now, if you're doing a PhD in the sciences, which I was, very frequently they will give you a living stipend and they will pay your tuition. And because you're doing research, or sometimes teaching labs is another thing that I did when I wasn't doing research. However, that living stipend is basically enough to pay for one person's upkeep. And so if you're a single mom with 4 children, as I was, and if you're not getting child support, which I wasn't, then you're basically living below the poverty line. And so times were tight. We had some serious medical bills. By the time I graduated, 3 of my 4 were in college, and of course we had financial aid, but they also expected me to kick in some. So it was a lot of money. And the first couple of years, there was money from my divorce, but a lot of that went to the lawyer, and the rest of it disappeared very quickly. And so, yeah, there was nothing to do but go in debt, right? I did work jobs at the side, which you're not technically supposed to when you're in grad school. That's supposed to be your full-time job. But, I needed more money. $1,000 a month would have made such a big difference in terms of not just meeting my expenses, but also, I just had severe anxiety about would I be able to feed my kids.